All right, Acts chapter 24. I'm going to modify question number 1 just a little bit on your handout there, but maybe I was a little bit too presuming in my question itself. So let's start with this question. Do you think that most people trust public officials?
No.
No? Okay, that's just kind of generally what I assumed. But why do you think that's the case?
Well, they don't always uphold the promises they make.
Okay, that's true. Many people in the past who've occupied those public offices have made promises and didn't come through with them. I mean, generally speaking, when somebody who occupies one of those offices says something, makes a promise, do we think that they're going to keep that promise? Do we expect them to? Maybe I should ask it that way.
I would expect them
Okay, but realistically, do you expect them to?
to. At one time, they were expected to.
Okay.
I think there's a difference too between like a local official and somebody in Washington D.C. because locally it's not like they're making $500,000 a year. By the time you get up there, though, I think money and power corrupt. And so by the time they get there, they have so much power and they're making so much money off this deal. I think it corrupts even good-hearted people. There's some honesty, I'm sure, but that's my take on it. Locally, I don't think it's near that. There's not as much money involved.
Okay. Go ahead.
I think, as a rule, you don't trust anybody you don't know. So for public officials, all you have is actions speaking out of the words. Once you get to the higher level of there are so many moving tools and gears within the machine of the government that even an honest politician is going to make a promise that somehow he didn't keep. So it really doesn't matter whether they're honest or not. We can find enough to go, he can't keep his promises. And then it doesn't matter what his intention is, it doesn't keep his promises. Actions speak louder than words. So, you're a politician, I don't trust you.
Yeah. I think that's kind of the general mindset and thinking. And like Adam said, I'm sure there's some good people that occupy public offices, but I would venture to say that the majority of them don't have the public's interest at heart, number one. Now, they might be there in some form or fashion to serve the public, but if an opportunity comes up to better themselves, which one do you think they're going to choose? Public's best interest or their best interest? Yeah, probably theirs. And, I asked that question because one of the things that really stands out to me when you read about Paul going through that kind of this, legal process, and of course he's appearing before public officials, isn't he? How do you gauge the Roman political system when you read the book of Acts? It was pretty corrupt, wasn't it? Would you say that they had the public's interest in mind? That was first and foremost in everything that they did, these public officials we read about in the book of Acts?
Well, the last one or two characters looking for some money. He's trying to make the Jews happy. Get some money too, that'll be some money.
Yeah. So a lot of these Roman public officials had really their interest was first and foremost, wasn't it? They were really concerned about themselves, how the public viewed them. How they could gain favor with the public. They weren't necessarily concerned about, is this just or unjust, but would this give me a favorable position in the eyes of people? And so we're going to read about that here in Acts 24, and not just Acts 24, but like I said, really throughout the book of Acts. I think when you come across those public officials, kind of the general consensus is they're in it for them, aren't they? And they're looking out for themselves, number one. So Acts chapter 24, we're reading about Paul's defense before Felix here. And remember, he is sent to Felix because he was arrested in Jerusalem. And, of course, the Jews had a plot to kill him. Julius finds out about that plot, and then he sends Paul away by night under heavily guarded. and sent him to Caesarea to Felix, the governor, to appeal before him. And he said, if you guys have any, accusations you want to bring against Paul in court, you're going to have to go there and make your accusation. So we're reading about Paul's appearance here before the governor Felix. So question number 2 here on your handout. Why did the religious leaders, and of course we're talking about the Jewish religious leaders here, why did they hire a man by the name of Tertullus? Yeah. Literally, it says he would, in the original language, he was a professional speaker. And what do you think that means?
In the art of persuasion.
Yeah, what's kind of interesting to me is, remember, we're transitioning here from, in Jerusalem, Paul kind of had a Jewish hearing. He appeared before the Sanhedrin Council and they questioned him. But now he's in Roman law now. And so he's entering into the Roman court system as he's going before Felix here. There are a couple of things that are kind of interesting to me, just, I don't know, maybe from an outsider's perspective looking in. Do you think Tertullus, do you think he was Roman or Jewish?
We're experiencing prosperity that you're on the side, we on the area. I don't know.
Yeah, but now we're in Caesarea too. We're not in, the area of Judea and where Jews are heavily concentrated. It is kind of interesting that this name, it's a Roman derivative. It's derived from the, what is it, Tertius, I think. It's derivative, a derivative, I'll try to say that quickly, of the Roman name Tertius. And so, could it be a Jew who had a Roman name? Well, it could, but generally speaking, do those Jews from Judea take on a Roman name? They're not going to have anything to do with Rome, are they? So it's kind of interesting to me. If that's the case, they've hired a Roman lawyer to kind of plead their case. Yes, sir.
I mean, how long have the Jews been under the control of Rome at this point? It's been generations. So, I mean, he could easily be of Jewish descent and not be a practicing Jew. And still identify as, these are my people, but at some point, all it would take is grandpa to have become a Roman citizen in some manner for him to be able to go, our people, and still be a full-fledged Roman.
Yeah, the difficulty that I could see in that would be the chief priests and the Jewish elders associating with it, because they wanted nothing to do with the Roman government. Understand that. They wanted to be themselves. They thought they were independent. They were their own nation. Nobody had the right to rule over them. And so if you had anything to do with Roman government, they didn't want any part. That's why they didn't like tax collectors, right? Because they were out here collecting money for the Roman government. And so it's kind of interesting, because what language do you think would have been spoken in the Roman court?
Latin.
Probably Latin. Yeah, and I doubt there were many Jews who spoke Latin, or at least publicly, who spoke Latin. Most of them were, holding fast to Aramaic and to Hebrew. So maybe they needed somebody who spoke the language. They certainly needed somebody, and understand he wasn't just a speaker. He's really a lawyer. That's what he is. He's a guy who would have been familiar with the Roman court system and how it worked, and could kind of speak on their behalf and hopefully gain position and have the governor side with them in the decision that he's going to make. So it is kind of interesting. How serious do you think they were about getting Paul convicted here? Pretty serious if they would hire a Roman lawyer, right? That tells you a little bit about these Jews and their mindset. So question number 3, of course, read the story. Tertullus begins, when he first addresses Felix in the court, begins with flattery. Why does he do that? Well, why would I call it flattery, first of all?
catch more flies with money. You're gonna get, if you build him up, you ain't gonna push you down quite so quick. But so that, from that standpoint though, he may not have been a Roman, because you could look down his nose at the Jew pretty easy, Roman.
Yeah. Yeah, I could. But why flattery? Why would I call it flattery? What would you call flattery? How would you define flattery?
It's compliment.
Okay. What kind of compliment?
Well, it's all about him. It's just, we're doing this, and it's all because of you, Everything's going good, you're the reason.
Yeah, and I would, in my mind, I would kind of define it as maybe what's a good word here? Maybe an over-emphasized compliment, where you say something about somebody and I guess we kind of talked about it a little bit last week, but the idea of, exaggerating the truth of a statement. And when Tertullus is talking about Felix, what kind of impression would you get if you were just listening to him? You didn't know Felix and you were just listening to Tertullus talk about him.
Greatest thing since.
Oh, man. Yeah. Great guy. Does everything for the people, doesn't he? Enjoy all these things because of all the things that he's set in motion and all the things that he's done while he's occupied this office. But listen, if you go back and you study Felix was anything but what Tertullus, or any way but how Tertullus was describing him here. So, but before you can win your case, you think, well, we got to win this judge over. And so they're trying, of course, flattery at the beginning to really build up his ego before they start actually making their accusations against Paul. So when it comes time, question number 4 here, when it comes time to actually make accusations, there's at least 3 accusations that are made against Paul. What are those accusations?
American Standard says it calls it an insurrection.
Okay, so how would you put that in a modern day language? Boil it down in a simple way to understand here.
He's stirring up riots, and the Romans don't like him.
Yeah, one of the things that they talk about is, and specifically among who? Who does he mention there?
Jews.
Yeah, among the Jews, right? Would you say that Paul was a guy who promoted riot among the Jews? He did some things that stirred him up, didn't he? But as far as him going out here and, trying to actually get people to riot and rebel, that wasn't what Paul was trying to do. Now, again, that was kind of the reaction of some of the people whenever he went out and talked the truth, and the things that he said, aggravated them to such a degree that they reacted in a negative way. But that's one of the accusations. He promoted riots among the Jews. What else? Yeah, and it's kind of interesting to me, too, that how does he word that? I don't know if it's I'm reading from the New King James Version here, verse 6. What does the King James Version say?
You also have gone about to profane the temple.
There you go. Gone about. New King James Version says he's tried. He's tried or gone about to profane the temple. Now, what was the accusation that was made against him at Jerusalem?
One of the guys in that was a Gentile.
Yeah, the accusation was he had actually profaned the temple, right? Here, they've kind of changed the story where he's just tried to do it. He didn't actually do it, but he tried to do it, and as you'll read through the story, they're kind of saying, before he could actually profane it, we stepped in and intervened and kept him from doing something that was against the law. But it is kind of interesting how the accusations, they've already realized we can't actually prove that he's brought a Gentile into the temple and profaned it, so we're just going to say that he tried to do it. What else stands out there? Anything else?
Greater leader of the sect of the Nazarene.
Yeah, he was one of the leaders of this formed or organization or sect that was known as the Nazarenes. Why would that have been important to the Roman government?
Anything that riled up the Jews riled up Rome, because Claudius had already run Rome.
Yeah, anything that developed a sect or a division would have been of interest politically to Rome, wouldn't it? So, they're saying, he's bringing up this new division, this new sect that's known as the Nazarenes, and he's kind of the ringleader of all of it. They call him, of course, a pestilent fellow. I think of a pest, I think of a fly or something like that, but this literally means, something like a plague. You wouldn't want either one. It's somebody you wouldn't want around. But this is the type of guy that he is. So, basically, he promotes riot among the Jews. He's the leader of this sect, and so he tried to profane the temple. Didn't actually do it, but it was in his mind. His intent was to go in and profane the temple. So, question number 5: who supports Tertullus in his accusations? Who's there to support him? Yeah, the Jews, and specifically, which ones? Yeah, and who was he? High priest, and who else do we have? Yeah, the Jewish elders. So the Jewish leaders or heads, they were all there to back up these claims that their lawyer was making in Roman court here. So question number 6 is this: speaking in his own defense, how was Paul's introduction? Of course, they got their turn, and then Felix nods to Paul and basically says, okay, they've spoken, now it's your turn to do some speaking. So when you read Paul's introduction, how is it different from the lawyers?
He just says how it is without trying to butter anybody up.
Yeah, he didn't really, he stated some truth and some facts, but he's not going out of his way to try to flatter this guy like Tertullus had by embellishing the truth of some of the things that had happened. So what was Paul, standing here before this man, what was Paul, what was a positive thing in his mind that he states in standing before Felix?
Is this his first rodeo?
Yeah, Felix knew about the Jews, didn't he? He'd had dealings with the Jews. I think, he didn't just become governor. I think he'd been in office for about 7 years now. And so he'd had dealings with the Jews. Obviously, he knew how they operated. He knew about their laws and things like that. So Paul is standing there and he's saying, man, I'm glad I got you, because you know exactly how these guys operate. And you know the kind of things that they try to blow out of proportion and, accuse people of. So I know that I'm not standing before a guy who doesn't have any knowledge and any experience in these matters like you have. Again, that was a genuine expression of Paul, as he stood there and how he felt as he stood there before this man. So question number 7, this is kind of interesting. Why would Paul choose to defend himself rather than hiring a lawyer? Why do people hire a lawyer? Okay, have somebody speak on their behalf. Why else? They know the law, right? They know the court system. They know how things operate. And so it's pretty important to have somebody like that. I've seen firsthand the difference between a lawyer who understands the process versus one who doesn't. And when the judges have somebody who stands before them, who understands the process and know how things go and speaks their language, it goes a lot smoother versus a guy who doesn't. So why do you think Paul wouldn't have hired a lawyer?
Paul was a smart man and knew the law. But he also had one thing: they didn't get God out.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, remember the promise that Jesus makes to his apostles. And of course, I know that Paul isn't one of the original apostles, but undoubtedly you'll see this time and time again when Paul stands before a public official. One of the things that these men had whenever they made that appearance was they were inspired. In other words, the Holy Spirit was leading these men to telling them what they needed to say and how to do it. And there's a couple of passages, I don't know, I don't want to read all of them, but Matthew 10, verses 18 through 20. Here's what Jesus says to his apostles. He said, "You will be brought before governors and kings for my sake, as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. But when they deliver you up, do not worry about how or what you should speak, for it will be given to you in that hour what you shall speak. For it is not you who speaks, but the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you." Of course, Mark and Luke both record this same event. They have just a little bit different wording. Mark says this. He says, "When they arrest you and deliver you up, do not worry beforehand or premeditate what you will speak. But whatever is given you in that hour, speak that. For it is not you who speak, but the Holy Spirit." And then Luke, over in Luke chapter 12, and a couple verses here, about verse 11, he says, "Now when they bring you to the synagogues and magistrates and authorities, do not worry about how or what you should answer or what you should say, for the Holy Spirit will teach you in that very hour what you ought to say." So it's kind of interesting to me. You know, Paul wasn't worried about lawyers because he knew he didn't have to worry about what he needed to say. He knew those things were going to be revealed to him. And when you read Paul's defense, and then you read about his, won't say for lack of a better word, testimony is a good word. It's used in the Bible a lot. It kind of gets bad rap because of the way the religious world uses it today. But he also gives kind of a testimony of some of the things that have happened in his own life too, just to kind of put the icing on the cake. But he did that because he was led by the Spirit. And so Paul didn't have to worry about what he's going to have to say. That was one of the promises that was given to the apostles in the first century. Jesus said, "You're going to be called before these people. You're going to have to testify. You don't premeditate what you need to say. You know, it's going to be given to you that very hour, and whatever the Spirit tells you to speak, that's what I want you to speak." So, do you have a comment?
I just think that would be like totally awesome. Now, think about you, like Sunday's coming up, and you know I don't have to think 1 second about what I'm going to talk about. It's going to be the perfect sermon. God will give it to me. That would be like an awesome gift.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they had to be arrested in that.
Yeah, I was going to say, the only thing they had to worry about was the reaction of the governors and the rest of the people, which was pretty bad in most of these cases, wasn't it? Yeah. So, but again, it's, you know, he had somebody better than an orator or a lawyer on his side. So he didn't have to worry about hiring somebody in his defense. So as you read over Paul's defense here, what question 8 here, what points does he make in this defense before the governor? Remember some of the accusations that have been made against him. How does he defend the idea that he wasn't guilty of these things?
Actually, it just tells them the truth, what really happened. And Felix has already said, the problem is their law, not Roman law. Felix has already said that. I'm not Felix, the guy sent the letter.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to get him killed, and the only people who can kill a Roman is a Roman. Roman law.
Yeah, so, you know, he'd been accused of kind of being this ringleader of this sect, and, you know, he stirred up this mob and these riots and everything. And the first thing that he tells him, he said, "Man, I haven't been in Jerusalem long enough to make a mob or a riot." How long had he been in Jerusalem before he got arrested? Well, he's sitting at 12 days right here. I think it was 5 days, it says, before Ananias, the high priest, comes up and makes an accusation. So he was in Jerusalem less than a week. And was Paul like a regular guy in Jerusalem? Where was he mainly? He was out here preaching and establishing Gentile congregations, wasn't he? He wasn't like a staple, a fixture in Jerusalem. And so Paul's saying, listen, I'm this stranger who showed up a week ago in Jerusalem. I ain't had time to put together a mob or a riot and get all these people on my side. You know, so first of all, times against the accusation that they're trying to bring against him. The second thing that he talks about is, what was he doing when they arrested him? Yeah, he was worshiping in the temple. Was he arguing with somebody? You know, and had he stirred up this mob or this crowd and they were all gathered around with him and they were pushing their weight into the temple area? No. So he said, when they arrested me, listen, I wasn't arguing with anybody. You know, I wasn't causing a dispute. I didn't have this mob along my side that we were trying to invade the temple. So that the idea that again, I was arrested because I was a ringleader of this sect and formed this huge mob and this riot, and I was arguing and causing trouble with anybody. That's not even the situation that I was arrested under. And then, of course, the third thing that he points out is what? You got no proof for all these accusations. That's kind of a problem, isn't it? If you're going to bring somebody into court and try to convict them, you got to have some kind of proof. So he's saying they got no proof for any of these things that they're saying, and if you'll just look into it, you know, what I'm telling you here, you'll find that what I'm saying, it can be verified. So what is he first of all, he kind of, again, defends those accusations that were made against him, but then he also points out, question 9, his true purpose for his visit to Jerusalem. And what was that? Yeah, remember he was bringing the Gentile offering to the poorer saints of Judea. And so, literally, he's telling him, listen, they're saying this is my purpose for coming to Jerusalem. You want to know what my purpose for coming to Jerusalem was? Go talk to the elders of the church of Jerusalem. And what they'll tell is I brought an offering, and I brought it for the Jews, didn't I? Brought it for the poor Jews, to help my fellow man, my countrymen. That was my true purpose for coming in Jerusalem. So basically he's telling Felix, if you look into these matters and you do a little research, you'll find that what they're saying about me is just, you know, it's ludicrous. It's ridiculous. What does Paul say about the charge, and specifically here, number 10? Let's do the charge about being of the sect of the Nazarenes. What does he have to say about that? Yeah.
Remember the what?
He said about the only thing they said that was true is that I am a member of this sect that they call the Way. And what he says about this is really interesting to me, because he's saying, let me tell you a little bit about this sect. Okay? We claim to worship the same God that they claim to worship. Okay? We claim to follow the law and the prophets. That's what they claim in their religion too. We claim belief in the resurrection. That's the same thing that they believe. So if this is such a bad sect, you know, what does that say about their sect over here, the Pharisees and the Sadducees? Well, obviously, he was pointing out, you know, it wasn't a divisive organization in any way. But he did acknowledge, yes, I am a member of that sect that they call the Way. So he wasn't ashamed of that in any way. How did the apostles show that Tertullus didn't have any legitimate charges against him? What else do you read about there in verses 18 through 21?
I find it interesting that there were some Jews from Asia, and they should really be here.
Yeah.
Because and like she had mentioned, I mean, Paul was for lack of a better term, was really a trained attorney. His education was such that he could walk into a courtroom and he has the brains and the education to hold his own against anybody, the Holy Spirit or not. And so he's pointing out here, he's like, so they came into the annexation. They brought 0 witnesses. And if I understand that correctly, the way it reads, it's like, but here's some people who were actually there that they neglected to mention, almost as if to say, is this the mob they're talking about? Which I find really interesting as far as disputing the rioting and running around with the mob thing.
Yeah.
He was like, hey, there's no one people around. Go talk to them.
Yeah.
And then, of course, when you get down far enough where he says, really, here's what I want to try. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, like you said, he pointed out, you know, if I had all these people, this mob, where's everybody else? You know, there wasn't a mob when they arrested me, you know, or else they'd be in here with me. And not only that, but like you said, where are the people that are accusing me of profaning? They said that I set about to do it. Where's the people who are actually accusing me? Hey, I saw Paul do this. You know? And so imagine in a court of law, if you were to bring in somebody, accuse them of something, and then the judge says, okay, where's the witness to this? Well, they didn't show up, but they told us, here's what happened. You think that would fly in court? Well, no. Yeah. Yeah. So Paul is again, reinforcing this idea. There's no evidence. The charges that they're bringing against me, I'm not guilty of them in any way. And not only that, he points out, he said, I went before their council. Now, he's talking about the Sanhedrin council. Remember, Paul stood before them. They questioned him. What did they convict Paul of? He wasn't convicted of any crime, right? So he said, they were there. They were present. Let them tell you what crime they convicted me of when I stood in front of them. Well, he hadn't been convicted of a crime. So again, Paul's just kind of pointing out, they're ridiculous in their claims and their charges that they're bringing against me. So what did Felix do about Paul's case? What does he decide he's going to do?
He wants to bring the chief captain, and he's going to hold him until he comes.
Yeah, so he doesn't make a decision, right? He says, I got to postpone this hearing until I talk to the Roman centurion. Now, how long does Paul stay in prison? 2 years. You think he ever talked to the Roman centurion in 2 years? What was the real motive for him keeping him in prison?
Grass.
Yeah, well, two things, really. First of all, Bible talks about how he wanted a bribe from Paul before he would release it. If Paul would have bribed him, he would have released him. But Paul wasn't going to pay him any money to be set free. And the second thing is, by keeping him in prison, whose favor was he obtaining? The Jews. So somebody said, hey, what do you think about Felix? What kind of job is he in? Oh, he's a great guy. He's doing a knock-up job. He got Paul in prison there for us for 2 years. But he does send and talk to Paul, right? And something interesting here, when they're kind of talking, Paul's talking to Felix and to his wife-in-law in Roman law, Drusilla. What kind of effect did Paul's speaking have on him? Yeah, he started getting uncomfortable, didn't he? And in fact, that word in the original language is not just being afraid. He's talking about great fear, terror, we might describe it as. When he started hearing Paul preach about some of these things, it started getting at him, didn't he? And he started becoming afraid, and so basically he said, well, it's time to quit, time to unplug and kind of don't call me, I'll call you. That was kind of his approach with Paul. But the Bible says he does call upon him continuously again, doesn't he? Not because of the message that Paul preached, but because he wanted Paul to give him some kind of bribe so that he could be compensated before he turned Paul loose. So, you got any comments or questions? That's kind of chapter 24. All right, Lord willing, next week we'll look at chapter 25.
It does appear that this was pretty common about Paul, because even the elders of the church told him they had heard about it. They knew these things coming in, so I'm sure it's not just, the Romans didn't want any problem. Period. Whatever they're going to do, just don't cause problems for Rome. And any governor, his job depended on everybody being good to him. So this hearsay was coming in, was nothing, no facts.
Yeah.
Hearsay.
Yeah.
Like we do today.
I think Paul, in the first century world, kind of interesting though, when you get over into Acts and he actually goes to Rome, the Jews there haven't heard anything about it. So I think it was just kind of where Paul had been, people knew about him and had heard about him. So, yeah.